welcome everyone to our next panel. So don't just look for the needle in the haystack, buy the whole haystack. Today we are going to find maybe the needle in the haystacks or some of them, because what we are very passionate about at this panel is to find the details, because the devil is in the details. So Genius Act and MiCA regulation is our topic today. Differences, we're going to talk about this focus of the different regulations, the scopes of it, the implementation, and everything that is around like the differences, but also the commonality maybes. But before we get started, I would just like to introduce my beautiful panel, and they will introduce themselves by just telling who they are and what they are doing, like in the space and the role. So hit it up.
Hello everyone, really happy to be there. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm head of public affairs for Morpho, which is the second biggest DeFi lending protocol in the world. And I am the co-founder of the professional body of Web3 players in France and Europe, Odran. Hope you know them. And really happy to discuss this very important topic about regulations, because I am actually passionate about the regulatory developments around Web3.
Super.
Hello, super glad to be here in this panel. I'm Odran. I'm in charge of legal affairs for the core team behind Cow Protocol and Cow Swap. We are actually a DEX aggregator. For those who know, we have a very nice moo sound when you swap. We are a leader in our domain. Our references are actually Vitalik himself, the Ethereum Foundation, but also World Liberty Finance that are using CowSwap to settle their trades. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I am Oliveira. I am Chief Compliance Officer at VENGA. We are a young startup here in Barcelona. We are a Spanish company, and we aim to go global soon. In my role, I had the task to help the team to get the MiCA license. So it was a nice, interesting journey, and we are waiting for the final decisions. We are almost there.
Hello, everyone. Nice being here. So my name is Carola. I'm managing partner at YPOG. YPOG is a law firm standing for you, which is all you here, and POG is for Partner of Game Changers. So you know which industry we are advising. So we are advising game changers, and my personal field of expertise is regulatory law. I love to help business models to act compliantly in the European market, because we are based in Europe, mainly in Germany and in the UK.
Super. So now everyone in the audience know, how is the sound back there? Because it's very difficult to, please raise a hand if you find that the sound is good enough, because otherwise we will bring the microphone closer. Okay, perfect. So just to set the scene, I'm sure that a lot of the people in the audience know already about the regulation and the MiCA and Genius Act, but still for the ones who don't know all the details, I'll just sum up that we are talking about Genius Act, which is one of 3 regulation or federal laws that turned into force in the United States this year. And we're talking about MiCA, which is the regulation for the EU, which also turned in full force like last year. And the way to the regulation was quite different, because it actually took like 2 months for the US to pass the Genius Act, which is one of 3. We've got the Genius Act, which is the stablecoin regulation that we are going to talk about today. Then the Clarity Act, which is the next US regulation coming up. And then the Antitrust Act later on. But MiCA regulation was, and maybe it's somehow saying about the way that the EU is working, was actually like discussed in 2020. And still, it took some more time than the United States too. But let's dig into the scope to begin with. Faustine, would you just talk about like the scope of the regulations, the differences, and what you see?
So yes, as you said, MiCA is a very large regulation if you compare with the Genius Act. If you take MiCA, MiCA's the goal was to implement a regulation for markets in crypto assets in Europe. And when you are thinking about crypto market and markets, if you take MiCA, you are covering both the issuance of those crypto assets and the secondary markets. And the issuance is about crypto assets which are not stable coins and stable coins. If you take Genius, we are not at all on the level of the secondary market. Genius is really about the issuance of stable coins. So even on the level of the markets which are covered, it's very different. Also on the crypto assets which are covered, it's very different. Even if we are dealing with stable coins in both MiCA and Genius, the scope of the stable coins covered by Genius is really smaller because it's really focusing on the payment stable coins which are fiat collateralized. If you are looking at MiCA, you have, and I won't go into too much technical details, but you have two categories of stable coins. Well, you can have rules different if you are in face of a payment stablecoin, of an investment stablecoin, and at some point we told European institutions it can be a bit difficult to distinguish or to make a clear categorization. And in MiCA you also have the crypto collateralized stablecoins and stablecoins collateralized with other things and fiat currencies which are covered. In Genius, the question is raised because even if Genius does not cover those non-fiat collateralized stablecoins, it's already written that there had to be a deeper analysis to see if there will be another framework or new rules for those stablecoins. So, in a nutshell, if you take Genius, you are really on a very specific layer of the market, let's say, to the issuance of payment stablecoins, and you have some first ideas around what could be the services on those stablecoins and the rules that can arrive for the crypto markets providers doing custody, doing exchanges, doing other services. But it will be the point of other regulations to deepen those requirements, and it will come afterwards, maybe quite rapidly, because we saw how long it was to make Genius appear, and actually it was not that long. So we have to stay tuned, because it will be actually in the coming months and years that we will have more clarity about that.
So in terms of the way to get there, it's often like the objective of the law that is actually pushing people to get together, and then either it's like we need to solve this now, or we're going to like take more time. So Odran, in terms of the different objectives from the different laws, so even though MiCA is covering a lot more than the Genius Act, can you say something about the objectives of the law? What was like the intention? What did they want to fulfill when they do it?
Yes, of course. If we think about the differences, we can see the traditional differences between the EU and the US, where the European Union will look more conservative and looking into not only regulating the assets themselves, but protecting the sovereignty of the EU in regard to crypto assets. And this is why, as Faustine was saying, MiCA is quite wide on stablecoin and engulfs everything that can be seen as a stablecoin. And here, I would almost say that this has been somehow planned, or at least it's in the spirit to be able to push proper CBDC in the EU. So control the market of private money, just to make sure that public money remains here. So the objective here is very conservative, is for Europe to try to protect the euro system against external actors, but also against private European actors. If we look at the Genius Act, it's slightly different in the sense that the Genius Act will focus on payment stablecoin with quite strict obligations for issuer. There's no doubt here. However, the fact that they are excluding the non-payment stablecoin, as for now, at least, shows that the US wants to leave a little bit of room for innovation. And the strategy behind the Genius Act is quite clear with the new US administration. The idea is just to make sure to reinforce the position of the US dollar as a global currency. And there is absolutely no doubt here. And they are heavily relying on private actors that are issuing their stablecoin, but also leaving, once again, room for innovation in case some other form of stablecoin can, at the end of the day, be used. And yeah, I think this is classic dichotomy between the US and the EU.
Carola, you were nodding a bit. Do you have any supplementary things to add to this that Odran is telling us?
No, I think he said it out already perfectly, but I think the big difference is that the idea of MiCA has different angles, and one of the angles is, of course, financial stability. And I think the basic line for the Genius Act, I'm not talking about Clarity Act, because I think if we limit it to Genius Act, it's just stablecoins. Let's wait and see how the regulation will look like under Clarity Act. Because for everyone, maybe just 2 sentences, Clarity Act then tries to put things in different boxes. So these commodities like Bitcoins, ETH, etc., will be regarded as commodity and regulated under the CFTC. So it's then just a commodity with very limited regulation, because it's more a self-regulation system as commodities are regulated in the US generally. But it is a regulation, and then it comes to tokenized securities, which will, of course, be regulated as securities. So I think, therefore, let's wait and see. But when it comes to the Genius Act, it's quite clear that they wanted to push innovation through the door. And I think when it comes to the US kind of mixture between personal interests of some members, I think it might have a reason why it was pushed so quickly. But let's not discuss about politics, but I think the angle is different. It's more about innovation and pushing through this US dollar dominance, as you have said, and less this kind of financial stability mindset, as was one of the main goals within the EU.
It seems in terms of the future outlook from the United States that they were actually not just forced, but actually had to change their mindset. And Anna, you told me earlier today before we went on stage that you were actually at a US company, right? When they had the former administration. And so can you tell us a little bit about how it was to be in the middle of everything and the change?
That'll be a bit of a back the scenes. You know, before joining VENGA, I was working for a law firm in the US that was trying to bring US companies to Europe. And for the American culture, the way they do business there, MiCA was way too complex. It was too expensive, too many demands, and for them it was basically not interesting enough, all the bureaucracy. But they were actually going away from the way that the supervisors were acting there, so in the end of the day, MiCA represented for them something that is very natural for Europeans, this legal clarity, foreseeability, proportionality, things that we discuss theoretically, and then for them, it's when they saw allow me to say the chaos that was the Gary Gensler, SEC, and the legal demands that they were facing, then this foreseeability, clarity, it started to look interesting. And then they were shifting to Europe. And then that created also for them, that was a big complaint from companies there, that during this specific moment, they were losing a lot of brains. They were losing developers, they were losing investment, because big funds and also brains were just afraid of doing business there. So they were shifting to Europe.
In terms of, we were talking about details, so let's dive into the details of the differences that are in there. So I've noted some of them, and you can just chip in with other ones. So there's the reserve requirement, who can actually issue a stable coin. So if we just take
I can
some
take
of
that.
them, yeah.
I can take the reserve because it was a bit of a discussion internally in VENGA about the asset reference tokens. So we needed to delve a bit deeper there. And Genius Act is like super clear. If you want to issue a payment stable coin, you need to have parity one-on-one. So it needs to be 100% backed by US dollars or treasury bonds or a public debt from the USA, to use an expression that we are using here. In MiCA, we have what we know, the e-money, EMT, e-money tokens, and asset reference tokens. I think at this point in time, we are very acquainted to what it means. E-money, you need to have an EMI license to operate with that. It needs to be liquid. You need to have your deposit, funds deposit also in a banking institution. And for ART, we would think about a proportion of your funds in euros or any fiat currency, plus bonds, treasury, and you can also still have an algorithm that keeps the balance in this reference token. But if you allow me, what I would really want to bring, like to spice up a bit this discussion is that why is this happening like this in the US? You know, because they are bringing the fact that they are demanding 100% liquid parity. You cannot charge any fees for withdrawing, and it needs to be instant. But why only US dollars and why only treasury bonds? Because in the end of the day, if you want to issue a payment stablecoin in the US, you need to buy treasury bonds. So that means that if you have a huge debt in your country, or you have a problem with liquidity, or if your currency, if the US dollar is losing dominance in the global market because any other political issue, what that means is that it will force companies to buy your public debt, buy US bonds, and bring dollars back to US banks. So this is very interesting from this point of view. So in my opinion, very humble opinion, Genius Act is nothing to do with crypto. Genius Act is about keeping the US dollar dominance in the world and making US dollar universal in the crypto space. But it's not about them thinking about innovation, regulation of crypto, etc.
Okay, so it's about like the overall society and not about maybe the consumer. So what about the protection of the consumer? Because if we are thinking about shifting over to a new era.
So I wanted to go back on the point of the entities which are allowed to issue stablecoins, because it's a very, very big point and a crucial difference between Genius and MiCA. If you take MiCA, the approach was only incumbents, because they would be authorized as credit institutions or e-money institutions would be allowed to issue stablecoins. So at the time when MiCA was discussed, there was no really understanding, a not good understanding of the reality of the market willing to issue such stablecoins. Because if you go back in between 2018, 2020 in Europe, those willing to issue stablecoins were more the newcomers, which has projects. At that time, I was working at Consensus, and there was a big retailer, big group, willing to issue his own stablecoin. When we were talking with banks, well, it was not really a topic. So it has been decided in MiCA to have this narrow scope of incumbents being allowed to issue those stablecoins, and it makes it very difficult for newcomers to comply with those rules. And that was the intention. If you take Genius, it's very different. So you have very different level of financial institutions and banking institutions, which are supervised at different level of the US being allowed to apply to issue stablecoins. But you also have non-banks, and that's clearly written, non-banks being able to get authorized to issue stablecoins if they comply, of course, with the requirements of Genius. So it really shows that there is a very different understanding in what is the reality of market, and also who we want to make this market grow. And in the US, there is really no reluctance in the fact that there could be new entrants. And actually, if you are looking at the main players, I'm thinking about Circle, I'm thinking about Tether, they are not the current financial institutions that we know. So it's a very crucial difference because it makes also very clear about the intention that we already discussed in between MiCA and Genius. The goal of MiCA being to really prevent from the development of the ecosystem of stablecoins and not to encourage it with the reality of markets, of market participants willing to do so. And regarding the entities, there was maybe, and I will be quick, another point that is interesting to raise. The by default rule in Genius is that if you are a foreign issuer, you are not allowed to issue stablecoin dollar. And I think it's important to show that in the context of Genius, the US were much more interested and they did take care of protecting their markets. While in MiCA it's very different. There is no that much protection of our actors, our markets. And it makes it really easier for foreign players to be able to issue stablecoins in Europe. So I think it will be interesting to see in the coming developments what will be the regulatory regimes that the US will consider as equivalent to favor the fact that foreign issuer can issue stablecoin dollar in the US. But at this time, the by default rules is that if you are a non-US based entity, you cannot. And I think it's also a very pragmatic approach of the US in their willingness to develop a very powerful US ecosystem of stablecoin dollars.
Odran, do you have any comments on the fact that if the Genius Act is not taking into consideration the protection of the consumers, but they are really pushing and everyone can do it? So any comments on what do you think is a better way to go? I know the sound is not that good here up here.
Thank you. So no, actually the Genius Act does protect quite well. In case an issuer fails for whatever reason, the Genius Act will make sure that the users are made priority to get back their assets. So that's also a difference with MiCA, where it's a more broad consumer protection regime that applies to users. However, there is not that financial priority given to them to protect them against any market event. I think this is quite interesting also because this will provide a lot of confidence in the US stablecoin market, and user will be more attracted because they can feel more protected against any event like we may have seen in the past.
So you have been advising companies. So if I was a new company and I wanted to go into the US or to Europe, what would you say? What is going to be the main concerns for this company?
So currently, I would say there is still a bit of advantage in Europe because we have certainty. And even if people say, yes, it's complicated, and what you said might be a bit difficult, so having achieved advising companies like Coinbase, Bullish, and others to enter the European market, I think it's the way of how you approach them. And I think currently it is still an advantage that you have full certainty. Clarity is so connected to the Clarity Act now. You have full certainty what is happening in Europe. You have a set of documents now which goes beyond MiCA, so it's also all the level 2 regulatory technical standards in place now. So you really know in detail what's coming up. Of course, there are still some open questions because there are coming up points nobody has thought of when drafting MiCA. But nevertheless, it's quite sure what you have to go for when you would like to set up a company here. And then you have this advantage that whenever you have an HQ in one of the European 27 countries, of course, you can easily passport. And passport means you just notify your home regulator that you would like to passport your services. And we talk about services and assets. So I think that's also one advantage because if you set up, for example, a crypto exchange, or if you set up a, let's say it carefully, in Europe, you certainly know what's coming up, and then you can passport your services, so your MTF, trading platform services, custody services, everything connected to that into the European market, wherever you want to. And I think doing that currently is an advantage, and I think that was the reason why previously companies prior to MiCA, I think only Germany had a regulation for crypto assets, and they deliberately came to Germany because of that certainty. And these are one of the first movers now with MiCA licenses. Because of having the German license, it was easy to transpose them into a MiCA license, because as you said, and also Faustine said, the requirements are very similar, and for Europeans very similar in particular to financial instruments, which is interesting to know, because therefore if you want to do perps and other things which would be governed by MiFID II later on, it's not so hard to jump from one regime to the other, because it's very regulated in a very similar way.
And so this is a very big opportunity of the MiCA regulation to have this passport. And that's why it's a very big problem when you have local regulators like the French, the Italian, and I think the Austrian, or I think the Austrian ones, all together decided to say, we are not sure that we will grant the passports, even if you have MiCA compliant entities coming from other countries, because it makes the uncertainty for actors on this very big advantage, which was the passport. So it's really annoying. We had the with this passport the opportunity to grant an advantage that they did not have with regulation. And actually, I think that if you ask obliged entities, what are the advantages of being compliant with regulation? There are not a lot of except the passports. So there is currently, that's why I call your attention, a very big problem in the approach of some local regulators, which would like not to grant these passports and to make the life of the companies which are currently struggling with such compliance even more difficult, and with even more incentive at the end to be compliant.
Yes, because that's right where we are right now. So we have the regulation, and it's supposed to be like the same regulation and the same way of interpretation in each member state. But yet we see that there are different times where it turns into force, like it could be up to 18 months of difference from one country to another. We have like some of them are like the regulation translated into is like 30 pages, other ones are like 80 pages or even more. So something is like not like completely one-to-one. And if we do have a passport, which is in theory like a very nice thing to have, but everyone needs to accept that the passport is actually like...
One small word, and I...
Comments on that.
We have countries advising on fast-track MiCA license. Cannot close our eyes to that. The biggest advantage of MiCA is passporting. You do the license once, you pay for it once, and you access the market. But you cannot advertise on fast track.
But we do see that people they applied in France, for example, and then suddenly they withdraw their application for MiCA, and then they went to Malta.
Yeah, I would say that that's not because they wanted to go to Malta. It's because they wanted to go to France and that they did not get the answers that they wished to get. And I mean, if you are looking at the list of the today CASP which are registered under the MiCA regulation, the point is not that Malta is giving lots of authorization, because it's not the case. If you take the French authorities and the Maltan authorities, they barely authorize the same numbers of CASP, around in between 5 and 7, I think, something like this. The biggest providers of authorization today is Germany, for example. So the problem that is raised is not one. I mean, Malta is not giving free passports to lots of companies. Well, there are some process of scrutiny by ESMA on some precise topics, but the problem of those actors that they wanted to come to France is that they thought, and they were right, that they wouldn't have not enough resources and that the delays would be too long to get authorized, and so to be able either to launch or to continue their activity. And at the end, that's what actors want to know, is they want to know when they can launch their activity. They want to know until when they will be able to keep on doing this activity. and their choice will be to the most efficient regulators. So it could be Malta, but actually it can be Germany if you are having a list, a look at the list. So it's really annoying because the message that is provided, and I understand why regulators want to share this message, is that that's the fault of actors that decide to go to Malta. French actors, they are currently struggling with French authorities. They are not going to Malta. They do want to be compliant under the with the French authorities. They did not go to Malta. They want to stay in France, but it makes their life really, really much more difficult.
Maybe one point to add. Yeah. I think that's important to see, but what we have to also know is that in the first stage, you have always these differences. So I have the advantage of being a bit older, so I know the pre-MiCA 1 world, which was 25 years ago. And when MiCA 1 and MiCA 2 was implemented, it was a bit the same. You had these differences all over, and I think that's exactly what we experience now again with MiCA. But in a certain point in time, we will have at least a certain standard. We have these ESMA papers, these ESMA Q&As, so we get more and more certainty, and there will be more and more clear guidances for all the European regulators. Because I'm totally agree with you, we do see these differences, but I just wanted to point out it's normal early stage to see these differences, and I think we will overcome them. And because you ask about the US, it's not that the US is easier, because we have a federal level just for stablecoins. We don't talk about the other services. If you want to issue stablecoins, it depends on thresholds, whether it's done just on a state level. When it's above 10 million, it's on a federal level. You can opt in also for a federal level, of course, if you are below this threshold, but there are all different kinds of regulations. Yes. Anyways, so it's not that it's easier in the US that you just send in once. And when you talk about different states, so if you talk about the US states, Wyoming, it's very different from New York, because New York is like a French license, for example. While Wyoming, it's maybe closer to Cyprus and Malta, but you do see these differences as well. And I think that we in Europe have a lot of experience in kind of bringing things closer together again due to these ESMA guidances. So ESMA is the European authority, so European Security Market Authority. And I think that we have ways to kind of overcome these broad differences, and some will remain, and then investors will decide. If we look into the more institutional world, they don't opt for Maltese entities. They tend to opt for French, Italian, Spanish, German ones, Dutch ones.
So different scope, different objectives, different way of implementing. Not one is easier than the other one, maybe. But for all of you, like here on the panel, for the next 5 years, which of the Europe might be a bit in front at the moment, but for the next 5 years, where do you see like the whole industry evolving in terms of both innovation, but also protection of both the industry, but also the consumer? So, Carola, do you want to start, and then we can?
So I think the industry overall in Europe won't change too much. It's betting to go regulation better. In 5 years' time, maybe not, but in 10 years' time, I would say we converge more and more the classical financial services world and this kind of crypto assets world. I think that also overall on a global level, Europe and the US will kind of align, and I think one big portion of that is how the Clarity Act will look like in the end and what is regulated. So I think in Europe we will have, of course, new coming up laws like MiCA 2.0, because there are DeFi world is not regulated. We didn't have the point or the time to touch that point because it's about decentralized world, which is not really regulated in MiCA. We will have clarity on that, but overall, I think the US and Europe probably will somehow align, because I think it's difficult otherwise to do trades on a global level.
What I would say is that also MiCA is being used as a template for a lot of jurisdictions in the world. So maybe in a couple of years from now, we will have a more harmonized system internationally. So we might see Latin America, Mexico, Africa, we might see a lot of countries uniting, like we saw in AML regulation over the 20 years, like we saw in banking regulations, IBAN, SWIFT systems, So I think that that will make our lives as compliance officers easier as well, And one thing that we didn't mention until this point, and I think that would be also a turning point, is how the national competent authorities and EU supervisors are acting. So a lot of the discussion to create the Genius Act and the Clarity Act is this chaotic interpretation that they have from the supervisory agencies there, and fines, and you have no clarity on what's to come if you're a big exchange. And in that sense, I feel very proud of ESMA. It's difficult to read and understand all the regulatory technical standards, but I think they are setting a very, very good pace in the sense that it's not only the law, but it's also how this law is being applied in all those countries. And I think as we evolve, we will see also regulators gaining experience and applying this regulation even clearly. And I think then we will have innovation in Europe, because we will know, okay, this is not securities. You don't need a broker license, Dylan. You can have this token listed in your company, That will come, and I will be happy to see it.
Odran, your thoughts?
So for the next 5 years, if I look at MiCA, I'm pretty sure I'm not worried about incumbents and institutions because this regulation has been really tailored for them. I would be a bit more worried about DeFi projects because there is this uncertainty about DeFi. What is decentralization? What is intermediation? And Europe is not really giving good signal to DeFi products. While actually, let's be completely clear and honest, DeFi are the one innovating in this field. I mean, it's our field. So let's see if and when MiCA 2.0. How this will go. While in the US there is still that wait and see policy of the US legislator, even though these future acts are coming, but it seems that that up to now DeFi is a bit more accepted as an innovation vector. For the whole market and ecosystem, and that the US will really want to rely on DeFi for the future of their economy. So let's see what happens. Just hope that European regulator will leave more room for innovation in terms of stable coins, but also in terms of other products, because we really have a lot of things to bring to this market. We have a lot of things to bring to institutions, products that they have like no idea about, and this is really important. I think talking for DeFi products, we really need to fight hard to get there.
Yes, I will also jump in DeFi because it's already scheduled, at least in MiCA, that there is a work to be done by the European Commission for both a definition of what is fully decentralized, and that's actually making the life a bit uncomfortable right now for DeFi protocol, because we can imagine tomorrow if there's a strict understanding of what is fully decentralized, that at the end there are DeFi protocols falling into MiCA in a second stage. So we know that there is this work coming from the European Commission, also the analysis on whether it is feasible and necessary to regulate DeFi. And it's a really from scratch work, because that's how they understand DeFi, and that's why they decided that MiCA could not cover DeFi. It's because the rules of intermediaries, which are the targets of MiCA, cannot apply in the world of DeFi protocols. Fortunately, right now, the position of the European Commission is that we are not in a rush to regulate DeFi. So it does not mean that we need to wait for that. To the contrary, and that's why actually I've joined Morpho. It means that we have the time to prepare this regulation in cooperation with public policymakers at the level of member states, because they are involved in developing European regulations, and at the level of European institutions. So this will be really key questions. In the strategy and the speeches that we can have in the US around DeFi at the moment, it's quite positive. They are really positive. But I don't know if you had a look. Last week there was a leaked proposal of DeFi regulations from the Democrat senators, which was quite awful, because actually the goal was to re-intermediate DeFi protocol and to qualify them as digital asset intermediaries. And that's actually the main risk tomorrow, if we do not work with policymakers in order to make them understand that we are not in the world of intermediaries, and that we cannot be covered by the current regulations, and that we do need a proper one. And I think that what will come to the mind really quickly, just to for the final word, is that it will be really more easy for regulators to understand how to regulate the interactions between TradFi and DeFi, because the word of TradFi and the word of intermediaries is much more familiar to them. And what we see is the development of more and more integrations of DeFi protocols by third parties. So that was the recent news at Morpho with Société Générale Forge, with Circle, with Coinbase, etc. And for regulators, it will be much more tangible and easy to see how they can add requirements to those people in their interactions with DeFi. So
super.
Hopefully we have this time to cover.
That will be the final words, because we'll have to leave the stage for someone else. But a lot of things are on our minds. We have a lot of opinions, and we hope that you enjoyed our conversation around the Genius Act and the MiCA as much as we did. Thank you to my wonderful panel.
Thank you.